Again, good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, and also good morning, good evening to those are joining via online, via Zoom. We are now in the sub-team 1, turning the tide, reversing deforestation and forest degradations, especially focusing on session 3, responding to changing agri-food commodity markets requirement to turn the tide on deforestation. I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Fitrian Aldiansyah. Currently, I'm the country director for Indonesia and Malaysia for IDH, the Sustainable Trade Initiative, and also the Global Envoy for Nature-Based Solutions. Before we start, first I would like to thank you, FAO, for Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, and of course, Korea Forest Service for organizing the 15th World Forestry Congress, and especially to TFA, Tropical Forest Alliance, represented here by Felipe, for being the partner for this specific session and occasion. As you may have read the sessions, we're going to discuss a huge challenge, I think, faced by many different actors throughout the supply chains of agro and forest commodities across the globe. It's about how we as global communities addressing the issues of deforestation, for instance, and trying to find solutions when it comes to developing models, developing concrete activities on the ground to address such challenging issues related to deforestation. We are now accompanied by distinguished experts here. Here at the stage, as you can see, we have Diego from Ecuador. We got Wendy as well, as well as those are joining via online. I'll mention the names soon. We will, of course, having good discussions, hopefully dynamic discussions with panelists here as well as online. But at the second part of the discussion, we will have presentations coming from two Indonesian experts, Professor Heri Purnomo and Ahmad Dermawan. Yesterday, I was inspired by one of the moderators when starting the discussions, explaining his name. I would love to share a bit of story of my name. I mean, my parents gave the name to me, but I didn't understand in the beginning. But my name is rooted from both Malay, Indonesian, and Arabic language. And when translated to English, it sounds like the steward of the Holy Earth. So here I am, trying to be the steward of this kind of discussion to get the better of the earth. So with that, I would like to invite Felipe from the Tropical Forest Alliance. Felipe is the head of public sector engagement of the Tropical Forest Alliance of WEF, World Economic Forum. He got 20 years of experience in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. He got also a master's degree from Nicholas School of Environment from Duke University. Felipe, the floor is yours for the keynote speech. Over to you.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much, Fitrian. Good afternoon, good day to those joining from the distance. And great to be here with the fellow panelists, both in presence and those friends that are in the panel, colleagues in these challenges that are joining virtually. As you said, Fitrian, thanks a lot to FAO and the Korea Forest Service for this effort, especially to the Republic of Korea for the grit of making this Congress a reality and using this as a real, proof of concept of how we can work on a hybrid model. Today in our session, it's about market-based measures and how this can help out tackle deforestation. And I think it's important that we should mention what's the context behind the demand of agricultural products, these market forces, and how that has generated a challenging situation with regards to our forests. We have to understand that this demand for agricultural products has increased dramatically over the last 20 years. Yes, we've grown. We're growing as a population. From 2001 to 2018, there has been an increase in global growth in terms of population of 25%. This puts a lot of pressure in resources. But not only are we becoming more, but we are eating more. The consumption of food has increased in 48%. That means that there's twice the amount of increment in terms of food consumption with regards to population growth. So this just extrapolates the pressure on the resources. 60% of that growth in demand for food comes from Asia. There's been a big leap in terms of the middle class of Asian countries, and this has doubled since 2000 and created a lot of pressure. And this doesn't seem to stop down because, there's a projection that at least 1.8 billion of people will get into the middle class from now to 2030. So we have a complex reality. What's behind this growth? What does this mean? Not necessarily all bad. We tend to see things black or white, and I think an important takeaway message is that we have to take our time to analyze things in detail. About 160 million people in this period of time have been lifted out of undernourishment. So yes, mobilizing food allows us to enhance food security and reap the benefits of bringing food to all population. It brings a lot of protein consumption, about 45% of protein consumption, and it has also generated a economic dynamic, which is of importance and value. 12% of the total workforce of Indonesia is linked to palm oil consumption, for example. Now, this just puts into the scene a very complex set of competition of forces. Food security, economic development, but also we have livelihoods and we have forests in the mix. So how do we balance the equation? Forests, at this moment, I think they're taking the hard hit within the context of this equation, because the deforestation has increased tremendously, linked to the dynamic behind food production. About 200 million hectares of tree cover have been lost in the tropics in this time of this period, and out of those, 60 million are primary forests with all the value in terms of carbon and biodiversity. Now, this context is challenging and brings us to the need of thinking how we're gonna shift the conditions in such a way that we keep an equal or very well balanced distribution of benefits. For that, I think the pandemic years have become an important moment to raise the bar in terms of the discussion, and this has brought to the forefront a series of processes that really look into the issue beyond the will of those trying to do good. Voluntary action has been addressed through more driven processes of creating mandatory action. And this is where, many markets start to frame out regulatory frameworks that want to push in the right direction. However, the challenges associated to these frameworks are daring. You know, the road to hell is full of good intentions. So how do we put together the pieces in such a way that putting together a new set of rules do enhance conditions? That's something we're going to learn more from our panelists today, and that we look forward of understanding how these competing demands can really be balanced out in such a way that the forest does not take the hard hit. But remember, it's not only the forest, also we have livelihoods in the mix. So if we're going to have regulatory processes that put a lot of burden in companies, in multi-stakeholders that are really leading the way in the mobilization of commodities across the spectrum, how do we make sure that this model allows the engagement of smallholders in an effective way so all forces get balanced out? We invite you to hear more from our panelists and discover how we can go about this challenge collectively. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Felipe. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the chance now to listen directly from our 5 experts. The first one, I would like to welcome Maggie Charnley. She is the head of the International Forest Unit of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy of the UK. Ms. Charnley, or Maggie, has 20+ years of experience, including also as the lead negotiator at the UNFCCC on agri-commodities. Maggie, if I can throw a question to you, I hope that you're online already. As you can hear from Felipe, it's now also about demand, and the demand is like growing 25% or more. And the UK has been very active in promoting actions to decouple soft commodity production from deforestation, taking action at different levels, including also, I think the UK has been significant in leading the way, developing this kind of multi-stakeholders policy dialogues, like the FACT dialogue as part of the UNFCCC or the COP26 in Glasgow. I'm wondering whether you can tell us a bit more about these initiatives and why you think the supply chain approach can be a strong push or lever in achieving the objectives to halt deforestation. Maggie, the time is yours.
Adrian, thank you. And thank you so much to Korea. This is quite a moment in time. The last 2 years have been quite extraordinary, and it's good to see the forest folk of the world coming back together at Congress after so much time apart. So we really, as the COP26 presidency, we really wanted to put forests at the heart of the climate discussion. And as other speakers have said, that's very much about people and livelihoods too. And we all know how significant a contribution agricultural commodity productions make to deforestation, but also to the food security challenge that we're all facing. And so getting those mechanisms right is of vital importance. And we helped, together with Indonesia, we brought together the Forest, Agricultural and Commodities Trade Dialogue to bring together particularly producer governments with consumer governments, but also with a multi-stakeholder track, so with NGOs, civil society, and working with the big commodity traders to bring the actors across the supply chains together. And we, at the core of the FACT approach, is very much one about partnership. And as suggested by the name FACT Dialogue, one of dialogue and discussion. So we wanted to make sure there was some kind of forum to support producer countries, so those countries where agricultural commodities are produced, to help them uphold their laws and to produce policies in tandem at the consumer and the producer end that really worked together. And the FACT dialogue represents countries producing 80% of agricultural commodities, together with the consumer countries that are responsible for much of their purchase. At COP26, we announced a dialogue, the UK Prime Minister, together with the Indonesian President, we announced a dialogue, but also a roadmap setting out 14 actions across the full suite of areas, things like transparency, trade and markets, and also support for smallholders, which we'll talk about later. Since Glasgow, the officials from the 28 countries in the FACT dialogue have been meeting to identify those actions that are of the earliest priority, the bedrock actions that need to be taken forwards over the coming year, with a view to being able to make some progress ahead of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. The other thing I wanted to touch on today was the UK's domestic legislation. So the legislation we're putting in place for our own consumption of agricultural commodities. As we all know, a significant proportion of deforestation is illegal in the country in which it happens, up to 90% in some of the key forests. And the UK's world-leading due diligence legislation concentrates on that illegal deforestation, ensuring that illegal deforestation will be removed from supply chains for those commodities provided in the UK, and really helping to reinforce the messages from the governments who oversee the forests in the country's production. The law now, we have already put the initial due diligence is in our, what we describe as primary legislation, and that has to be enacted in secondary legislation, which we're currently consulting on. So the details are being worked through at the moment before approving by Parliament. But that new law is one of a wider package of measures we're taking to improve the sustainability of our supply chains. And it's targeting particularly big businesses, so thinking about small businesses at both ends of the supply chain. But we'll also be complementing it with measures to support smallholders in the producer countries. And we're working with agricultural traders on their supply chain. So always thinking about how can you encourage compliance with legislation, not just cutting out small producers, but making sure they have access to legally produced sources right the way through the supply chain. To ensure transparency, information about businesses' due diligence exercise will be published. Businesses in scope that do not comply with these requirements may be subject to fines and other civil sanctions. Basically, the laws will make sure that on our supermarket shelves, our consumers can be confident that the products they buy aren't contributing to illegal deforestation overseas.
Maggie, I need to go back to you later on, but I think you pointed out a very interesting point of view, especially action taken by developed countries like the UK, facilitating the dialogues at the global level, as well as pushing forward for regulatory framework, such important elements in the context of halting and addressing deforestation. But you mentioned that 80% of the productions would come from, or has come from, developing countries. We are lucky to have, panelists coming from developing countries. Dr. Diego Javier Inclán Luna, he's from Ecuador. And I would love to ask him a question, especially since Ecuador has been proactive, Diego, in decoupling agriculture production from deforestation. I know also that you are a professor from the University, Central University of Ecuador, if I'm not mistaken. You also have identified 18 new species, which are quite amazing. I mean, so how can you say something about these actions taken by developing countries, especially by Ecuador, trying to decouple this kind of agriculture production from deforestation, in which hopefully could contribute to saving the species that you just have found? So, Diego, over to you.
Thank you for the question, and a special thanks for the organizers for having this opportunity to discuss these important topics. It is a difficult challenge that we are facing, because I think we are kind of in the need to review And a question that has been always under the discussion that we need to review how to do and how to deal with one of the most important drivers that are affecting our forest or biodiversity, and it's definitely the land use change. And here we need to be especially carefully because we in Spanish say that we have a phrase that we used to say that necesitamos tener cuidado que la cura no sea peor que la enfermedad. So the cure is not worse than the disease itself. And why is this? Is because there is a small borderline between kind of preventing deforestation and promoting the increasing of productivity of agricultural areas. So we definitely need to change and having a sustainable agriculture, but we cannot keep doing business as usual. We cannot kind of having the same agricultural system, the same markets, and pretending that that can be the solution. But definitely we need to do something to change it. So in the case of Ecuador, this has been kind of a long history, a long process to start to see how we can tackle this problem. And I think this has to, the experience of Ecuador, it has to be probably, we have to look back in 3 different steps. So the first one and the most important is going back to our action plan from REDD+ that we started to develop a long time ago. It was a participate process. And why is important this plan? Because it started to see, or we started to see the pathway, and we start already to identify the clear goals on how to work on REDD+ solutions. And actually one of the components, the second component that we have in our action plan is the transition to sustainable production and free deforestation change. So that is very important for us because we started to get a clear planification and start to see the goals and as a country and where we start to work on. And that's what we have the plan on 2016, this plan, so many years ago already. And then we start, the second step is to have kind of establish a reference level about the state of the art of how our forests are. And then on top of that, start to work on a monitoring system. So this is very important because we need to evaluate about how we are doing with managing the forest or any kind of solution that we kind of put it on. So from there, I think we can start to see the conditions to work in this change. So to really work on free deforestation change. And we have been kind of a pilot study working now from a couple of years in the Amazon region. Why the Amazon region is because it's the region in Ecuador where we have still more than 70% of the forests that are still on this region. But there are some threats coming from agriculture, especially in oil palm, cacao production, especially. And we have started to see how we can change those drivers in order to actually to work in the drivers in a more kind of a landscape perspective.
Diego, I need to stop you for a bit. I'll give the floor first to another panelist coming from developed countries, but you have already provided a comprehensive picture of what one developing country can do from really policy, pilot, as well as monitoring. I'll go with Ms. Nathalie Lecoq, Director General at VDO. She has 30 plus years of experience. She's based in Brussels, if I'm not mistaken. Nathalie, if you can hear me, I mean, from the developed country points of view, especially from private sector perceptions, especially because you are representing vegetable oil sector, what would be your take and as well as your standing positions when it comes to decoupling the productions of vegetable oils and deforestation, notably from palm oil, for instance. So could you highlight some of the concrete milestones in this process led by your organizations or partners? Natalie, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fitrin, and thanks very much also for the kind invitation and the nice words. Yeah, let me highlight a couple of points of introduction to your question. So, as you mentioned, I represent processors of oilseeds, and our knowledge extends, of course, to palm oil, but not only. We're also active or representing crushers and refiners of vegetable oils in the soybean sector, two commodities that have been associated with deforestation. And if we look back, we can say that the transitioning towards sustainable practices has been driven by at least market demand, by societal expectations, and by company commitments. So the fight against deforestation, which is indeed maybe a bit more prominent following international commitments after a phase where we focused, or companies focused a lot on broad sustainability criteria, but New York Declaration, Paris Agreement have found echoes also through corporate engagements with targets of 2030. Today, I would say for many companies, pursuing a no deforestation objective is really part of their social license to operate. Now, if we look at the tools, because that's what you've asked, I think we can say that the palm and soy chains are very different. And we know from experience that there are many different voluntary approaches that have been used to push for improved practices, to drive change and support operators in the change. So it's not one solution, it's not one size fits all that would work. Commodity or even biome specific solutions have been developed. And that has started maybe in some areas, in particular palm, which you highlighted, with certification schemes. So such as RSPO in multi-stakeholder approach, but then also company policy and due diligence systems with guidelines, OECD FAO guidelines on implementing them, have given rise to further voluntary action and has seen no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation approaches take off, where you have enhanced traceability, enhanced monitoring for compliance, reporting of progress. And we have also seen more locally or in certain regions, landscapes approaches developing. What I would say is that, and I think that probably echoes also what has been said, that achieving no deforestation goals requires both voluntary and mandatory measures, and it takes so in mandatory measures in a way of smart set of tools that would be needed to be able to have this toolbox where different players can use what they need depending on the specific conditions. And it takes involvement of public and private players so a sort of cooperation across the supply chain with public authorities to get to achieve progress, really. Now, finally, I'd like to touch base on EU situation more specifically, because how can we meet those expectations? You know that negotiations within EU institutions are still ongoing. It's probably difficult to give a clear guideline about what third country operators should implement in anticipation of them. The current proposal is more aimed at cleaning up supply chains, and it poses hence some difficulties and problems, notably with local laws in producer countries and with the reality of smallholders. So these are things that are still to be addressed in the process, which will continue still until at least 2023. But maybe one comment, whatever the final design of the EU regulation to drive change and achieve a no deforestation or a cleaning up of deforestation, We know already that it will be critical to enhance knowledge of your own supply chain, obviously. It will be critical to increase transparency across the supply chains and to improve traceability. And traceability also up to producer level, where the producer is located. So one of the important aspects will certainly also be, in this context, land tenure rights. I stop here.
Thank you.
And also I'm happy to continue the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. I think the setting up of this panel is, in my view, is so excellent, because after you mentioned about EU regulations and then combination of voluntary as well as mandatory measures, you mentioned also the need to connect again to developing countries' actions. I would like, with that, I would like to invite Ms. Wendy Arenas Reitman. She is the Executive Director and Co-founder of the ALISOS, as well as Director of Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative from Colombia. Wendy, having heard that kind of remarks coming from especially developed countries' points of view, can you bring us with the perspective of Colombia in this context, especially connecting the ground reality, linking with the challenges in complying with those market expectations? So how do you see that?
Well, thank you. I want to start thanking FAO, the Korean Forest Service, and TF8 for the invitation. I think this is a subject of utmost importance, and that we see market-based solutions are starting to be part of the Congress on Forestry, and there's a big challenge there. In changing a little bit on going on to cocoa, well, it's important to know that cocoa production in the world is done by smallholder families and farmers. And this has a big challenge for the implementation of any regulation that is going to go and motivate deforestation-free production. 5 million smallholders will have to adapt to the new markets and the new requirements of the markets. And this means that the decision-making and the regulatory process will have to have in place the considerations of small farmers. One of the biggest concerns that we are having with the implementation of the regulation of the EU being completely in agreement with having legislation and regulation that looks and moves towards a deforestation-free is who will pay for the cost of the implementation. Are the small farmers that most 70% of those 5 million earn less than $3 a day going to be paying to adapt to a demand of a market? Who is going to put in place the traceability and transparency mechanisms, and who will have to carry that burden? And this is a huge question that needs to be answered. And countries like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and Indonesia, which are the countries who produce cocoa, have a very different reality of their value chain than, for instance, palm oil. Smallholders are the ones that are going to end up with the burden. And so here's the big questions for governments across the value chain, the global value chain. How are we going to walk with the farmers in order to adapt? What are going to be the transition phases in order for farmers to adapt? Will the market be willing to pay the price of new requirements? And these are questions that are critical. We know the EU, and I must say myself, in Cocoa Forest and Peace Initiative, which is one of the value chains of deforestation-free that Colombia is implementing with TFA, one of 5. And we know that there's a big commitment in the European Union to start accompanying African countries and less so Latin American countries. We share very little of the global market, but we are very big producers. And so we did a sample work with the European Forest Institute to start to think about a system of traceability and transparency for Ecuador and Colombia. And questions become to be important in terms of feasibility of implementing requirements. We have 2 years before the implementation of the European Union regulation, and we are thinking and having open discussions regionally to find out how we're going to be adapting and how countries and governments will have to adapt as well, and what it means to actually those small farmers. So the big question here is, who is going to pay for it? Who is taking the biggest burden? And is it enough just because we're talking about landscape monitoring, transparency, and traceability? And so how is also the upstream, the downstream going to be adapting as well to that? And I would leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Those difficult questions. I think we need also to ask other panelists after this. But now to Gert van der Baai. Gert, he is the senior EU policy advisor at Solidaridad. He got master from Wageningen. Gert, you heard from Wendy and also other about the challenges and so on in implementing that kind of requirements in developing countries. But do you reckon that the interventions coming from Europe, for instance, from developed countries, the market-based measures are sufficient? And then can this be used to effectively address and halt deforestation? Gert, over to you.
Thank you, Fitrian, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak to this great conference. Let me start by saying that I don't have this great story about my name as Fitrian has. My name is just copied from my grandfather's name. A difficult question, Fitrian, to answer in short. I think a short answer to the question, will market-based measures be or can they be effective, is yes, they can. They definitely can, and they are needed. I think if we really want to change land use, I think signals from the market are definitely needed, which also means that demand-side measures, including consumer markets asking for production that is deforestation-free, definitely will be a key element of any progress. But I think it's important to realize that only demand side or market-based measures will not be enough. And Maggie already highlighted the importance of partnerships. I think partnerships in the end are key to any progress to reduce deforestation or to adjust land use. What we see at the moment is more and more companies speaking up and communicating commitments. Well, we've seen that over the past 10 years. Years ago already, a lot of companies expressed commitments for 2020 to be zero deforestation free. In the end, it was difficult to find a company that really realized that. It turned out to be more complicated than they had expected. And what we see is that, well, some of these commitments are now being translated into commitments for 2030. But I think with only these voluntary measures, and it has been said before, we will not realize the zero deforestation situation that we aim for. So it's good that also companies step up and that are and that zero deforestation commitments are now also being enforced by governance. But an absolutely key element to add there will also be supply side measures. So measures in producing countries where buyers and governments and producers work together to actually change the agricultural system, because I think that's important to realize. We are talking about changing the agricultural system. And sometimes if you see all the statistics, it's easy to become desperate, but I think it's also important to realize that there have been, both recently and also longer ago, effective cooperations and changes taking place. For instance, between 2004 and 2012, deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon was reduced by 80%. And if you analyze what happened there, the main thing that happened is that both governments, private sector, and NGOs worked together to effectively change land use and to ensure that production was still increasing, but without expanding in forest areas. If you look at what is happening in Southeast Asia recently, the same is taking place there. In the recent years, the amount of deforestation for palm oil has been reduced by 50%, exactly with the same, let's say, background. Companies, governments, and NGOs align and make sure that the incentives are pointing in the same direction. So it can be done. And also there are examples in countries like Ecuador and Colombia where deforestation is being reduced. What it requires is good alignment between the different actors, support for farmers, especially smallholders, to produce in a more sustainable way. And I think, as I said, it's easy to become desperate, but there is no need. It can be done, but we need to work together to realize it.
Thank you, Gert. I think you kindly enough, allowing the next presenter, Professor Hedy Purnomo, to also showcase the framing and measuring impacts from this kind of partnerships on zero deforestations, bringing about the case study from Indonesia. Professor Hedy Purnomo is a scientist from C4, Center for International Forestry Research. He got a PhD in forest management and policy. Professor Hedy, the time is yours, 4 minutes, so please.
So thank you, Mr. Moderator, and also thank you to FAO and TFA as well as Korea Forest Service. Also, I'm with my colleagues here from C4, as well as several students, I think many students from IBB University. So I'm going to share our research entitled Framing and Measuring Impacts of Public and Private Commitment to Zero Deforestation with a case study in Indonesia. As Fitrian mentioned, this is really a case study where the private or public initiative work on the ground or not. So just measuring the impacts of the commitment, the impact themselves not yet to be analytically scrutinized. There's a lot of discussion on the initiative, but do they work? So using South Sumatra, Indonesia as a case study, we call it the incision analysis and development coming from Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel laureate, to identify the context and impact of public and private sector commitment. This is a map of South Sumatra, 9 million hectares, one of the provinces in Indonesia in the island of Sumatra. And public sector commitment was assessed by its policy and regulation, while the private sector commitment was assessed by its compliance with mandatory and voluntary certification schemes. Next, please. This is South Sumatra. As you see, the dark green is forest, light green is pulpwood plantation, and brown is well palm plantation. So we are going to measure actually whether the commitment from public and private sector are able to reduce deforestation on the ground. Yeah? So the demand of reducing deforestation is very high, but do they work on the ground really? Next, please. This is some of what we call public commitment, public policy and regulation. As you see, from 2011, 2019, there are a lot of regulation there, yeah, to environmental protection and fire prevention, as a peatland prevention, as well as a lot of green growth initiative on the ground coming from the public institution at the provincial level as well as at the district level. So in the left side, it is the area, and this is a private commitment. The FLECTI, FSC, ISPO, the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil, RSPO, and ISCC, and also the boundary of each certificate scheme. And then this is the analysis whether the public commitment are able to reduce deforestation. There is a null hypothesis there mentioning there is no difference between before and after commitment. And you see in public commitment is even they are able to reduce the deforestation but fail to reject the null hypothesis. Since there is no difference between before and after commitment in the public sector, but in the private sector, they reject null hypothesis. They reject that there is no difference. It means there is a difference before and after commitment. Next, please. And the key messages: South Sumatra is 9 million hectares, lost 63% of natural forest between 1990 and 2019, mostly during 1998, the political crisis. And public and private sector commitments do matter. Non-state actors support the implementation of commitment. They matter, able to reduce. But we found sufficient evidence that only private sector commitment were able to significantly, statistically significant, to reduce deforestation from years of commitment to 2019 at a 90% confidence level. And we also recommend that zero deforestation commitment must involve a radical shift in the current policies coming from public sector and practice, with stricter law enforcement, combating illegal activities, and transparency to inform progress. Thank you. Back over to you, Fitrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harry. I'd like to bring two panelists here in room. Having seen the examples coming from Indonesia, how do you compare, let's say, the cases in Ecuador or in Colombia? Perhaps, Wendy, you can start. I mean, are you also facing similar challenges as well as actions coming from the public and private commitments in Colombia, for instance? Please, Wendy.
Yes, thank you. I would like to start with the one comment that Gerd says, that definitely what we need to do right now is having a more dialogue between different multi-stakeholders. It's a collaboration, and there's TFA is an example of what they're promoting in terms of the coalitions of deforestation-free commodities and value chains. You have to sit with government, you have to sit with the private sector, but you also have to sit with NGOs, but also small farmers, and it will depend on the commodity. Each commodity has a different reality to its value chain. And so when we're talking palm oil, is very different than talking cocoa production. And we need to get involved the voices of the farmers. And I do believe that commitments from private sector, when they are accompanied by policies, can have an important impact. However, policies, as it has been said here in the Congress, in other spaces, are critical, but not sufficient. And basically, because it takes time to tackle down. They're difficult to implement. Sometimes they are designed with not taking into consideration the reality on the ground, and that makes it difficult. Or even global policies and pledges are very important to set new narratives, but to bring it down to the ground it's the big challenge. And I think the combination, of course, in an ideal world would be a systemic approach. And that means everybody gets involved at the same time with the same goals and work towards the same objective. And basically what we're starting to see that is starting to happen in terms of commitments, in terms of sitting down and having important conversations with key actors. The big question or challenge more than question is, once we start to tackle it down, how we're going to start to implement it and how sustainable that will be. And so what we're seeing is, okay, governments have a commitment for the well-being of their people, of the forest. The big question is, are companies and the private sector willing to go in the long term, or how are they going to start to affect? The big question, for instance, for cocoa growers is the market willing to pay a better price if we go sustainable, if we go deforestation free? Because market is the one that will be able to sustain the transition for farmers.
Wendy, I think I would love to get Natalie to answer that. I mean, are the market players willing to pay for that or to support that? Natalie.
That's a tricky question. Thanks for that. I think if we look at the European situation, I would say that you will find a small number of consumers that are willing to pay for sustainability. Finding consumers that pay for a no deforestation approach is more difficult, because for consumers in Europe, for many of them, it's a given. It's not acceptable. So they consider this probably a bit as like food safety. It should be provided. Now, this being said, of course, we know that implementing demand side measures will drive cost up for various reasons. The question is, are the procedures that are set up, are the requirements that are set up also then benefiting those that are producing, or are we losing the costs in the processes that are required to meet the regulation? And I think that's also one of the concerns we have been raising in current EU proposal, is that operators in the chain will spend a lot of money in meeting the regulations, while it would be better used to support farmers at origin, changing practices, adapting to a new set of rules, and doing the right thing in terms of moving to more sustainable practices. So I think that's something which we are very concerned or aware of, and also pushing into directions that are more effective in supporting on the ground adjustment.
Thank you, Natalie. I would love to go to other panelists, but due to the limited of time, I'll have the second presenter, Ahmad Darmawan, to share his points of view based on his research on turning threats into opportunities. Analysis of response coming from palm oil companies in implementing NDPE commitments. Ahmad Darmawan is currently conducting PhD research at Wageningen University. Ahmad, the floor is yours. 4 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you the FAO and the Korea Forest Service for having me here. So as the title said, would like to say about how the companies turn the threat into opportunities here. I think everybody agrees that no company would like to have negative publicity by having critics or protests from the NGOs for their conducts, even though the conduct is part of their commitment towards no deforestation palm oil production. So in this study, I would like to study how the companies would react or respond to the complaints mainly. Is the slide on? Thank you.
Yes, it is. Please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the next slide, please, Ted. If you look at it, the way I see the companies respond is where doing it as a process. The first is the company that scan the either through the World Wide Web or through any other channels about the companies or what the NGOs protest. And probably next slide, please. Yeah, this one. Thank you. Yeah. So in this the first step where the company scanning complaints is is they found that there are 4 types of what I called entities. This is to distinguish between companies with the NDPE commitment, and what I call entities is the companies that the NGOs are under of the NGOs complaint, and the companies are looking at or seeking information of how these entities relate to the companies. So that there is part of the second step, which is information search. What are the nature of the complaints, and then the relationship between the companies and the entities. So, and then once they found the information, they distinguish the type of entities each 4. Actually, the first is the subsidiaries, the part of the company's subsidiaries that are being complained by the NGOs. And the second one is the direct supplier, those who directly supply to the companies. And then the third one is the indirect supplier, which is the companies, the companies who supply to the supplier of the companies. But there is also another type of entities here, which I call link companies. They are not part of this ownership or suppliers. So this link companies is owned by either direct or indirect suppliers, but has no supply chain relationship. This is getting tricky for the companies when an NGO says that a company is clearing the land or clearing the forest here, and the company found that this is not part of our supply chain, but this is part of the ownership of the suppliers. Yeah, and then after this company find the information, then the companies start a response, what I call position forming. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, in about more than half of cases, the companies reject the complaints, saying that either the location of the deforestation is outside of the concession, and second one is the supply chain relationship. So there is no supply chain relationship between the entities and the company. And the third one is there is no ownership relationship between the entities being complained and the companies and their suppliers. And there are others here. And when I mentioned about other, it's not that the companies reject, but they acknowledge there is deforestation, but they say that it's not us who did it. Could you go to the previous one again? Thank you. Previous one, the picture. Yes, yeah. So in any case, so whether the companies reject or accept that there is a problem, the companies use that opportunities, that the threat, that the protest, that the complaints, as opportunities to engage with the suppliers, and the companies introduce their NDPE policy and persuade the supplier to either adopt the NDPE policies of the companies or make their own sustainability policy. So many of the suppliers accept one of those, but the companies also are willing to delink the supply chain when the companies found that there is no progress. To the end slide, yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of the challenges here, especially for the NGOs, is related to the access of the concession and the supply chain relationship, which is not always accessible. And especially when after the government of Indonesia, in this case where the study is conducted, has a court decision to ask the relevant government agencies to open the concession data. And it also show that the consistency building of the companies towards the supplier is an important strategy to build the critical mass of companies with the NDPE policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. With that, I would like to invite one or two panelists to respond, especially because this would relate, in my view, when it comes to building transparency or traceability system and what have you. Maybe I think I would love to invite Maggie first to respond to that. I mean, you have seen the challenge or the difficulty in creating such systems and connecting different stakeholders. Maggie, do you have any view?
Thanks, Fidrian. And thanks, Ahmed, for that very interesting presentation. I mean, I think right through every sector, I think we see transparency as a really critical element of being able to support the whole supply chains. And it's something we're looking at not only with direct commodity production, but also in the finance sector, for example, through reporting requirements. And pulling that transparency through helps the consumer end, but also the producer end, and helps, I think, bring the supply chain closer together. That it's one of those threads of work that builds on the partnership that Wendy mentioned in her intervention in relation to the last paper. So something we're very keen to support. And I think it will underpin consumer side regulation as well. And so getting the reporting systems right, but minimizing the additional burden on business where demands are coming from different places. And we need to make sure there's as much coherence as possible between what we're asking for.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I'd love to ask Diego, because I think in Ecuador you mentioned earlier that you guys also are developing this kind of monitoring system as transparent as possible. So can you reflect on the presentation made by Ahmed?
Yes, I think it's key that the information needs to be free. The information needs to be adapted to a monitoring system that can be not just in an open manner, but also in a responsive manner, so that can be used to take decisions. So, for example, in the case that we are using a monitoring system to see if the farmers, how they are doing with dealing with keeping the production in the agricultural area versus the keeping the forest in their same landscape. So that is something that a monitoring system having not just the information free, but also to having a system that can be operated to give you the answer that we needed in the time that we needed is very important as well.
Thank you, Diego. Last but not least, Kurt, if you can also share your points of view.
Yeah, thank you. I want to add a few words on this. First of all, I think it's, I want to thank Ahmed for his overview, because I think this is really an important subject. First of all, because of the importance of the NDPE commitment as such. We are talking here about no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation commitments that at the moment cover more than 80% of the palm oil refining capacity in Indonesia and Malaysia. That is, I think, massive. And I think it's also important to highlight what is happening under these grievance mechanisms, as Ahmed is showing. I think if this would have happened 10, 15 years ago, NGOs complaining, most of the companies would just have ignored it or simply rejected it and not have reacted at all. I think that we have this system where companies use the knowledge and the experience and seriously look into the complaints. I think that is a huge step forward. And I think it's really important to highlight this. And also, I think some of the outcomes are really encouraging. And it also shows, for instance, that in some cases, companies do disengage, but they only disengage after they have really tried to work with their suppliers on improvement. And I think that is absolutely a key element in all deforestation policy and even in all sustainability policy, that companies, first of all, engage with their suppliers and work together on improvement. And I think it's really great to see that this is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Hert. I've got so many questions to follow up, but I would like to invite the members of the audience if they want to also throw questions. I've seen two of them. I don't know whether those that are online can also provide questions via chat, but I've seen two gentlemen here. Please take up the microphone and throw the questions, but before that, introduce yourself and your organization short. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mas Fitrian. So my name is Satrio. I'm from EFI, European Forest Institute. So my question is, so this is an approach that I think many of the organizations working in the sector have tried out, is the jurisdictional approach. And I think it has not been mentioned explicitly, but I think some of you actually alluded to that. And we know that there have been efforts to link jurisdictional approach, which we thought can be more manageable because we are doing it at the district or provincial level with the market incentives and trade. So, and also there's some efforts to link that with traceability and transparency, as has been discussed just now. So what my question is that, because I know some of you are engaging with the jurisdictional approach, experimenting with it, can you comment on the effectiveness of it? What are some of the lessons learned? And I guess I'm also curious to link that with Professor Heri Purnomo's presentation on the public and private commitments, because I think there might be some interesting lessons from that study to the implementation of jurisdictional approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Satrio. I think before going to the panelists, so one of them, Felipe, TFA has been guiding the process also, supporting jurisdictional approaches in different countries. Can you, share your points of view?
Of course, thank you very much. I think that's a fantastic observation. Thank you. Picking some of the elements from the panelists, I'm encouraged by their thoughts, and I think that we do need this, let's call it double punch, right? Demand side measures that are taking place, but as Gerd mentioned, what happens with the supply side measures? And in a way, the jurisdictional approach is a way of building that supply side measures. Of course, for this to work, as Natalie reflected, we need the demand side measures are in the upstream in the downstream and supply side measures in the upstream, but we need a very slim middle stream, right? If costs go around making things, the paperwork, then we cannot feed that upstream supply side measures that can be developed in the jurisdictional approach. And why is this important? Because the jurisdictional approach plays many roles, but I would try to emphasize in two. One, it's probably the best way of setting up engagement, real, genuine, on-the-ground engagement processes, which in a way I think Wendy was referring to. But if you can really tap and mobilize resources there through the middle stream, through the real partnerships that can bring corporate work and governments into the mix, you can really generate innovation. And by doing innovation, you can fix the way we can go about traceability, do it in a way that smallholder engagement becomes the best way of doing traceability and not the losing end of the equation once you put into place traceability. I think jurisdictional approach sets the arena for this to happen if we get it right.
Thank you, Felipe. The gentleman over there.
Thank you very much, Fitrian. My name is Andrew Wardell from CIFOR, the Center for International Forestry Research, colleagues of Heri and Ahmed, who presented earlier. Firstly, many, many thanks to all the panelists, and also Fitrian, to you for your time management. This is the first panel I've been to today that has actually respected the time and allowed time for Q&A. Many sessions have not included that, so well done. My question is specifically for Maggie, Natalie, perhaps Hort, but also for Heri. Several members of the panel have alluded to the need for a fundamental change in our agricultural production systems across the world to feed the world. What I haven't heard any reference to is the role of perverse incentives. There isn't a single speaker who's actually referred to this. And yet we still have the US Farm Bill, we still have the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy, and specifically for Maggie, I think your Prime Minister has introduced new subsidies for agricultural producers in the UK, out now that you've left the European Union. And similarly, also, it's a question addressed to Heri. Fossil fuel subsidies are still very important in the Indonesian context. So I wanted to ask those specific panelists, what do you think needs to be done to address those problems of perverse incentives? If I'm not mistaken, the recent estimates I've seen suggest that agricultural perverse incentives amount to $560 billion a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. $1 billion questions to answer. Maggie, Natalie, you ladies first.
Great question. And I can't remember if it's 560. I've seen 300 billion a year quoted, but either way, whatever the amount is, it massively dwarfs any international climate finance or other funding to support farmers. So getting that kind of the public policy framing right and the subsidies right really matters. So two things. One, as COP presidency, we pulled together a group of countries specifically to look at subsidies and government policy support to agriculture and farming, with a view to pulling away from, as you describe, what can be perverse incentives and moving towards sustainable land management. So that's something we're actively taking forward in partnership with the World Bank, who've been very active in this area and really interested in looking at alternatives and supporting countries in getting their subsidy and policy right. The second is you're right. I think it's around 40% of the EU spend is on agriculture. So when the UK made the decision to withdraw from the EU, that was a huge chunk of work. We're still providing financial support to farmers, but over time, really moving that much more towards environmental land management. So there's been transitionary support. There's a package around on-farm support to introduce climate-friendly measures. But over time, that subsidy will move towards support for payment for ecosystem services, supporting farmers to increase biodiversity and water management, soil management, and particularly kind of landscape scale, encouraging work between farmers. But I totally agree needs to be a very strong focus of public policy and related to agriculture.
Thank you, Maggie. I don't know whether Natalie would like to add. If not, Gert, you want to add anything?
I think it is right that if you look at what has changed in the UK, that there is less generic support to farmers and more support for farmers focused on land management and positive impacts on biodiversity. So I think that is an important step. And I think it's also indeed important in developing countries to ensure that if there is support, that it is done in a way that avoids perverse incentives, and a lot of the incentives that are still given also in Africa, Asia and South America are not focused enough. And we as Solidaridad work in around 30 countries in the world, mostly with smallholders in commodities like soy, palm oil, coffee and cocoa. And what we see is that also there, a lot of the support that is given is not enough focused on really promoting sustainable production. And often is generic in terms of subsidizing fertilizers or cheaper pesticides. And I think a lot more can be done to really make sure that support is not only focused on promoting sustainable agriculture, but also focused on those farmers that really need it, which is in most cases smallholders.
Thank you, Gert. We got, I think, 1 or 2 minutes to wrap it up before I hand over to Serena. But this would be a good time perhaps for Diego and also Wendy. One point that you want to just push forward coming out of this kind of discussions. Diego, short.
I think it's still a challenge, but it's still a hope. We definitely need to work with smallholders. I think we changed like cocoa farmers in the Amazon. I think it's possible. We are making it. We are proving it that it's possible to have both sides of the coins working together. From one side, the producer, from the other side, the market. So it's very important that we need to put in a scheme to work with different stakeholders, because it's not just having a free change of deforestation. It's about improving quality. It's about having a kind of policy of understanding the needs of the small producer, not living alone, but also helping in measures of traceability and ensure how we can connect it with more farmers. So we are working with more than 4,000 markets, small farmers. So it is possible. It's challenging, but it's possible. So we have some examples, and I think that the good lesson is that we have an opportunity that we can demonstrate that it is possible.
Thank you, Diego. Impossible is nothing, so it's possible. Wendy, 1 point.
Well, it's difficult, just one issue, because there's many issues. But I would stress also the fact that we have to start look at governance issues in terms of the value chain as important, and bringing the voice of the smallholder farmers as important and critical for the designing of the solutions and the policies, I think, is critical. And I think that has to be done at all levels, not only in producing countries, but also in the solutions that are made at global level. Bring the voice of the ground, so the policies and incentives are done that will fit and that will be able to be committed to the reality. And I just want to say 1 second. Give me I think this is something of trust. Who is trusting who? The market, who trusts what? Transparency and traceability and data and et cetera. It's a matter of trusting the other. And what we're looking is very complex confidence that gives me confidence to the market, give me confidence as government, give me confidence as global actors in terms of, are we doing the right thing? And this comes to a very difficult issue and the question of jurisdictional also becomes critical there. What data are we trusting? Do we trust jurisdictional data, or market needs traceability? Or where are we going to put the efforts? Or transparency is for government and traceability is for the market? And will we trust both systems, or we'll go with one or the other? So I think here is something also having open conversation and trusting more all the actors in the value chain.
Muchas gracias. I think excellent points, voices and trust. With that, I will give the voice to Serena, but hands to all the panelists over here. Thank you. I have no task anymore to do the summary, because Serena would do it. She is the REDD+ team leader from the forestry divisions of FAO. She got 21 years of experience in the context of climate change mitigation, adaptation, and of course, REDD+. The floor is yours, Serena.
Thank you very much, Fitrian, and thank you very much all the participants, especially the speakers who are here live with us in Seoul, all the speakers that have also been with us from different time zones and that really dedicated time also to prepare and to be with us here. Stepping up after all of this wealth of knowledge is extra difficult, so it's very, very big shoes to fit, but it's my really great honor to be here and try to close and to wrap up this magnificent session. I sincerely think, I was also exchanging with my colleagues, I sincerely think that the wealth of knowledge that we have here is precious, probably one of the richest among the one on the World Forestry Congress. We are honored to be here. Really, we got to learn and to hear on different efforts that are already ongoing and that give also some boost towards the future efforts on country, local and international level. But of course, with a common point on the need for synergies between the agriculture production, the maintaining the important resources of forests. Also, we heard about the importance of REDD+ as really a booster towards this establishing platforms and cross-sectorial collaboration on the ground. But let me add also and reinforce a little bit that also a study that recently was done by FAO and the Basque Center for Climate Change noticed that between 1990 and 2020, the share of our agriculture products that are exchanged through international trade really increased from 11 to 24% of the world agriculture production. Over the same period, of course, we know that the global agriculture production has also multiplied by 1.7, while the harvested area has increased by 30%. In parallel with just the Global Forest Resource Assessment Remote Sensing Survey that has been launched just in these days here in the World Forestry Congress, also indicated that between 2000 and 2018, cropland and grassland expansion explained 90% of the deforestation. We knew this before, but this has been reconfirmed. Our dear friend Felipe also indicated the pressure that is always increasing. But now these figures don't have to make us step back. They actually have to reinforce our sort of actions, the urgency that is needed for agriculture trade to address deforestation, the critical need for cross-sectorial efforts. As we discuss and transforming really the agri-food systems to recognize the role of forests in support of agriculture, and at the same time the need for agriculture practices to be more compatible with maintaining forest ecosystems. We discussed the increased market demand can really help reducing deforestation. Of course, besides the important political, financial, technical support, all the enabling environment that is needed at all levels to really make this a reality. There have been progress, both from public and private sectors have been making steps. Fantastic that we heard from all the different panelists, both here and connected. Corporate responsibility policies have also increased, included different commitments on forest protection. Yet, as Wendy reminded us, the granularity on really how to achieve this, how to maintain the long-term sustainability, who's paying for it, where is the finance, who is taking the burden, how to ensure transparency and traceability. I think all these are a very important point. We're making steps, but there are still important points to be discussed. I think the panels and also the questions that were put here also indicated a bit widely the important and critical role of dialogue between stakeholders and the collective engagement at all levels. Maggie very importantly reminded us about the FACT dialogue that has been pushing very much also last year and will continue to push. This has been instrumental in renewing engagement of the largest producers, consumers, internationally traded agricultural commodities to protect forests. There are also other examples on the coalitions that were launched, for example, the Food Systems Summit, also in terms of halting deforestation and conversion from agricultural commodities. So this sort of international boost will continue. But what we really echo very strongly here on this table and in these discussions is the paramount need for the attention on the role of smallholders in agriculture supply chain. From small and medium farmers to micro, small and medium enterprises, they're really the key players in the production, transformation that is so much called for and needed, and the distribution of food and other agri-based products. They are at the forefront of the transformation of agri-food systems that we are calling for. So we are calling for this, but we must create the conditions, really, for smallholders to adapt and receive benefits from new market regulations. All these steps are important from the market, from the government, work that is needed, enabling environment, but we really need to create the conditions for smallholders to really have their engagement. The engagement needs to be facilitated and rewarded to achieve a real transformation, decoupling agriculture production and commodity production and trade from deforestation and forest degradation. So on this note, on the engagement at all levels, I really would like to thank for the engagement that was here, for the excellent moderation that also was remarked from Fitran. Thank you very much for that. The engagement and really passionate discussions from all the panelists, and especially the nice moment also of exchanges here that I think that it was so much needed also in this environment. So I think commodity and food production can and should coexist and thrive with healthy and prosperous forests. The responsibility, there has been progress on that, we learned, but the responsibility to make this a reality really lays with all of us in our different roles and responsibility and niche. So please continue to be engaged, please continue to maintain your passion and to transmit the passion to all of us in this work. Thank you very much for being here, and to you.